In every confrontation, whether in business, politics, or personal life, recognizing and exploiting your opponent's weaknesses can be the deciding factor that leads to victory. Even the strongest opponents, those who seem invincible, always hide vulnerabilities that, if you know how to identify and exploit them, will allow you to easily defeat them. But how do you spot these weaknesses without them realizing it? How do you manipulate the situation, guiding your opponent into making mistakes without leaving traces of your strategy? This is not an easy game, but rather the refined art of those who understand human psychology and know how to take advantage of every opportunity to gain the upper hand. Imagine an opponent you believe is unbeatable, yet they reveal a small opening, a careless mistake, just one timely move, and you can reverse the situation and seize control. That is the difference between the winner and the loser. In this article, we will explore strategies that will help you identify and exploit these weaknesses to secure decisive victory in any confrontation. Part 1. Observing and analyzing carefully. Imagine you're facing a powerful opponent who seems unbeatable. But behind that tough exterior, could it be that they really have no weaknesses? In the world of power and competition, every opponent has a crack, a hidden flaw that you can exploit if you know how to see it. The question is, how do you spot these weaknesses before your opponent realizes you're playing this game? Every victory starts with observation. To exploit your opponent's weaknesses, you must catch every small detail in their actions, words, and decisions. Every gesture, every glance, every reaction can reveal a part of the puzzle you need to solve. When your opponent thinks they're in control, you might uncover signs of contradiction in their actions, gaps in their strategy, or indecision in an important choice. Don't rush into action. The key is careful and slow observation. Sometimes, even the most seemingly insignificant details can hold the key to everything. If you master this skill, you'll realize that no matter how strong your opponent is, they can't escape your sharp gaze. Are you ready to enter the game? Because in the next section, we'll dive into the hidden gaps you can exploit to gain the upper hand. Part 2. Discovering gaps in skills and knowledge. Now that you've started to notice the subtle signs, the cracks in your opponent's actions, how do you take advantage of them? The answer lies in exploiting the gaps in their skills and knowledge. Even if your opponent appears skilled and confident, no one is perfect, and that's your golden opportunity to exploit. Imagine an important negotiation. Your opponent seems steady and decisive, but when you ask a specific technical question, their eyes flicker. A moment of hesitation, a brief silence. That's the moment you strike. This isn't the time to attack with forceful words, but to make them feel insecure, revealing gaps in knowledge they've tried to conceal. These gaps could be critical aspects of their strategy that they don't fully understand. A field they've only superficially grasped. A detail they've overlooked during preparation. That's when you can push them into a position where they have to choose, reveal their inadequacies, or continue to remain silent and lose credibility. Exploiting these holes isn't just about hurting your opponent. It's about making them unknowingly weaken themselves. But this is just the beginning. There are many more powerful tactics you can use to put your opponent in a tight spot. Be prepared, because the next section will reveal even more potent strategies. Part 3. seeking contradictions in your opponent's relationships. One of the most powerful tactics that few recognize is exploiting the contradictions in your opponent's relationships. The battles are not only fought between two individuals, but also within groups, connections, and the very relationships your opponent maintains. When your opponent's relationships are unstable, that's the perfect opportunity for you to intervene and create a rift. Imagine you're facing an opponent with a strong team behind them, but suddenly, one member of their team takes actions that harm them. Will your opponent be able to maintain that relationship? Or will it result in betrayal, a huge shock within their ranks? That's when you need to act. Contradictions in relationships can be your secret weapon to separate your opponent from their closest allies, making them feel abandoned and weak. Don't just focus on the obvious actions. Look for subtle signs within relationships, a lack of communication, simmering anger, or whispers between team members. As your opponent starts to feel the cracks in their relationships, they will lose confidence and no longer be able to fight from a place of strength. But this is just the beginning. There are more ways to exploit this instability. Stay tuned, as the next section will reveal further tactics to put your opponent in an even more difficult position. Part 4. Encouraging your opponent to make mistakes. When your opponent thinks they've gained the upper hand, that's when the opportunity for you to seize control arises. One of the most subtle strategies for exploiting your opponent's weaknesses is encouraging them to make a mistake. But how do you create that opportunity without revealing your intentions? The answer lies in manipulating the circumstances and guiding your opponent into a situation they can't control. Imagine you're in a high-stakes negotiation. Your opponent feels confident, certain that they will win. You can use their overconfidence to trigger hasty, thoughtless decisions. One question, a gentle nudge, and they'll rush into a decision they haven't fully thought through. That's the moment you exploit their lack of caution. But this encouragement doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes, you just need to create a tense environment that forces your opponent to act. A little pressure, a little shortage of time, and they'll begin to make poor decisions. These mistakes won't only affect them, but they'll also lose respect from those around them, further weakening their position. Taking advantage of your opponent's mistakes isn't just about putting them in a tough spot. It's about making them lose themselves. But this is just one of many strategies you can use. Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll uncover even more powerful ways to bring your opponent down. Part 5. Exploiting arrogance and complacency. Sometimes, arrogance is the most powerful weapon you can use to defeat an opponent without them even realizing it. Arrogance and the belief that they are unbeatable will make your opponent careless, leading them straight into fatal mistakes. And you know what? The moment they feel on top of the world is the moment you can turn the tables. Imagine an opponent who has grown too accustomed to success and believes failure is impossible. They've had big wins and now feel no need to prove themselves anymore. It's this arrogance that makes them lose their sharpness and their ability to perceive reality accurately. They start overlooking the small details, thinking they're invincible. And it's at this moment that you need to subtly create the opportunity for your opponent to harm themselves. You can use their complacency as a trap, feeding them the illusion that they've already won. that there's nothing left to do. As they lower their guard, you will be the one to strike, flipping the script. Arrogance will make your opponent blind to the danger lurking nearby. And you, the one who knows how to exploit this flaw, will step in and claim victory with ease. But this is just one tactic among many you can apply. Stay tuned for the next part, where you'll uncover even more powerful methods to seize control. Part 6. Creating a sense of threat in your opponent. Did you know that sometimes making your opponent feel threatened and uncomfortable can be the simplest way to gain control? When an opponent is under pressure or on the defensive, they're far more likely to make mistakes. And that's the moment you can exploit this weakness to push them into a difficult situation, forcing them to make poor decisions. Imagine a scenario where you slowly build up tension around your opponent, making them feel as though they are being surrounded. They begin to panic, scrambling to protect themselves, and instead of sticking to their strategy, they start reacting emotionally. At this point, every decision they make will be driven by anxiety and fear, causing them to expose weaknesses they've worked hard to hide. Don't rush into an attack. The key is to create an environment where your opponent feels they have no choice but to defend themselves when they act hastily, without proper consideration. That's your opportunity to close in and take control. As they lose their composure, you become the one who dictates the flow of the game. Creating a sense of worry and defensiveness in your opponent doesn't just weaken them, it strips away their confidence. But don't celebrate just yet. This is only a part of the plan. The next section will reveal even more powerful strategies to trap your opponent with no way out. Part 7. Putting your opponent in high-stress situations. Imagine having the ability to push your opponent to the brink, to the point where their nerves begin to unravel. Stress is a powerful weapon, one that can expose even the most composed individuals. When a person is under pressure, their carefully laid strategies crumble, and they begin to make decisions based on emotion, not logic. In these critical moments, you can watch as their facade shatters, revealing the cracks you can exploit. Picture this. You're in the midst of a high-stakes negotiation. The room is tense. The clock is ticking. Every minute that passes tightens the pressure on your opponent. As they begin to sweat, you'll notice the subtle signs: shaky hands, faltering speech, or a darting gaze. These are the moments when their mental strength is beginning to falter. And that's your opening. They start to forget their long-term goals, focusing instead on getting out of the situation with any kind of resolution. No matter how reckless, in these stressful moments, their instincts take over, making them more prone to mistakes. They might make promises they can't keep, reveal their true intentions, or even make rash decisions that they'll regret later. And you, calm and composed, can step in and capitalize on their weakness, using their emotional instability against them. By creating a high-stress environment, you force your opponent into a position where they can no longer think clearly. And that, my friend, is when you take control. But this is just one tactic. The next section will show you even more ways to trap your opponent in a web of their own making. Stay tuned, because the game is far from over. Part 8. Discovering your opponent's fears and exploiting internal tensions. Every individual carries hidden fears within them. fears they may not even realize they have. It could be a fear of failure, a fear of losing face, a fear of betrayal, or simply a fear of losing control over a situation. If you can pinpoint these psychological weaknesses, you can manipulate and push your opponent into a position where they begin to falter. When your opponent is driven by fear, they will act impulsively, revealing their vulnerabilities that they desperately try to conceal. Imagine facing an opponent who seems strong and confident on the outside, but you know deep down they're terrified. Maybe they fear losing in this power struggle, or they fear losing the trust of those around them. You could cleverly create situations or spread information that stirs up their anxiety, increasing their fear even more. As the fear takes hold, they will no longer be able to make sound decisions. Instead, they will react emotionally and make mistakes, exposing their weaknesses. That's when you need to act. But there's another factor you can't overlook: internal tensions within your opponent's ranks. No one can maintain solid power if their internal relationships are breaking down. A small conflict within their team, an unresolved disagreement, can quickly escalate and weaken them. Remember, true strength comes not just from fighting outwardly, but from the unity within. When you realize that your opponent is facing instability within their own team, that's the perfect moment to amplify the divisions. A subtle question, a carefully placed rumor, can escalate existing conflicts, causing even more disruption within their ranks. They will lose unity and consistency in their strategy, while you remain solid and composed. Exploiting fears and internal tensions isn't unethical as long as you do it strategically and with finesse. Remember, true power lies in the ability to maintain calm, control, and fight with intelligence, not brute force. When you understand your opponent, recognize their weaknesses, and use them cleverly, you will win every confrontation. But these strategies are just the beginning. The next part will bring even more powerful tactics to help you dominate and control every situation. Stay tuned, because the game is far from over. Through the strategies we've explored, you'll see that in any confrontation, it's not just about defeating your opponent, but about understanding the essence of their weaknesses and exploiting those psychological flaws, their instability in life, and their strategies. However, one important question remains: is winning this way truly worth it? And how can we use these strategies wisely? The problem to solve is how to utilize psychological tactics and strategies to achieve your goals without losing your integrity and values. It's easy to trap your opponent in fear, stress, or internal conflict. But can you ensure that you maintain your own integrity in the process? Using these strategies excessively could lead to unforeseen consequences, from alienating others to breaking down long-term relationships. The key takeaway is that you must use strategy in a balanced and subtle way. These tactics can bring temporary power, but if you don't manage their application, you risk becoming an enemy to those around you. Always remember, true victory doesn't just lie in defeating your opponent, but also in maintaining respect and building lasting relationships. What should you do? 1. Maintain clarity and ethics. Always stay calm and avoid being swept up by emotions when applying psychological tactics. 2. Use strategy wisely. Only apply these tactics when necessary, and remember that any victory is temporary if you don't build a solid foundation. 3. Respect your opponent. Whether you win or lose, respect your opponent as they play an important role in your own growth. What should you avoid? 1. Don't abuse manipulation. Using too many tactics to manipulate can backfire, causing harm to you in the long run. 2. Don't lose your compassion. Never trade kindness and ethics to achieve personal goals. A victory isn't worth it if you lose your core values in the process. 3. Avoid letting your opponent recognize your tactics. Don't let your opponent realize that you are using strategies to exploit their weaknesses, as they'll learn to counter your moves, and you'll lose your advantage. In the end, true power lies not just in manipulating your opponent, but in maintaining calm, intelligence, and respect in every situation. Victory is not just about power. It's about how you use that power to grow and move forward.